Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCGO codes, go ahead and check out the PoTown store. You can even get a 5% discount on your orders using that OmniPoke code. For today's video, we are going to be jumping back towards the Cosmic Eclipse new decks coming out. I think there's only a couple more brand new decks before I get back to sort of updating decks. I know a lot of people are excited for a few archetypes in particular, but today we will be looking at the Stage 2 Gallade deck. Obviously, there's a lot of cynicism around Stage 2s, especially non-GXs in this format, with the lack of search, but I'm hoping that Gallade can turn a few heads with the sort of things he has to offer. Let's jump into that basic concept. First of all, it's great that he's a Psychic type, because we get to use Mysterious Treasure. It's really important for Stage 2 decks to have good search ability, and with Treasure at your disposal, as well as we're playing Jirachi in here and the new Rosa supporter, I'm hoping that Gallade is a consistent enough archetype to actually stand up on his own as the main sort of front man. Rosa, the new supporter that allows you to search your deck for a item card, as well as a Pokemon and a basic energy, and put them all straight into your hand if your opponent took a knockout last turn. So we're really going to sit there with either Ralts or ideally a Jirachi, and they get knocked out early. Straight away, we can tutor out the pieces to get our Stage 2 rolling in the first instance, which is really good. It helps us tee off quite nicely without relying on things like Cynthia and Lillie to just get us into the combo. Rosa can finally help us tutor these things out, which is great. I think the biggest selling point of Gallade is that he has great type coverage. His ability allows him to be both Psychic and Fighting type, which is obviously very dangerous. We don't have anything that can shut off this ability because you're a non-GX and stuff, so that's really awesome. And it means that we can just be hitting some great typing right now. A lot of people are hyped on Dark Box. You have weakness on them. Pikarom is an ever-present archetype. You have weakness. Silvally coming into decks for sure. Dedenne is going to be in a whole bunch of decks, so that's the fighting typing really coming in as being like very useful right now. And at the same time, your Psychic type coverage is obviously very good against Mewtwo. So definitely something to bear in mind. Gallade definitely can put in work in these sorts of situations, which is really awesome. And on top of that, you do have a colourless attack cost, so that either opens up the door for us to play some funky energy and take advantages from great special energy that we have in the game right now, or even go down some different routes in terms of tech Pokemon attackers that we could have in here to help some more fringe matchups, I guess you could say. So let's jump into the Pokemon right now. And I'll start off by saying that I watched the Rare Candy deck video for Gallade. I'm sure a lot of you also follow that channel. If you don't, it's a fantastic one. And they did a really good job with their deck list. I think the list that I'm doing is really not too dissimilar to theirs, so you might be able to see a lot of similarities going on here. There's a few like key differences. I think Mimikyu is one of the key differences between our lists, but I really do think that they did a great job with their opening list. So I'm sorry if it's not too varied content from stuff that you've already seen from Rare Candy, but I really do think that the list that they put out was a really solid like starting point, and it was basically the same thing that I was trying already, like because I'd done all this work like a few months back or whatever when we first saw the Japanese scans, but I was like, man, their list is actually like super close to my original one. So yeah, shout out to those guys. Anyways, the Pokemon we've got going on here is 3 Jirachi. I really wish we could fit 4, but you literally just can't in my book. Then we've got a 4-2-4 line of that Gallade. Let's look at it in a bit more detail. 160 hit point Psychic type. With Psychic weakness, which is a little bit awkward, but we are, as I said, with that dual type ability, a Psychic and Fighting type, which is pretty decent. Do bear in mind that being part Fighting type isn't always a good thing, especially against things like Giratina that have resistance on you, which is a bit of a pain. But it comes with a Power Cyclone attack. For 2 colors, you do 120, and moving energy from this Pokemon to one of your benched. That text is really important, otherwise this wouldn't be a viable archetype at all. You wouldn't be able to chain attacks very easily without using things like triple acceleration energy. But thanks to Power Cyclone moving energy around to usually back up Ralts and Kirlias, it means that even if the active is knocked out, we can easily power up a second Power Cyclone the following turn, as long as we can recover the Gallade themselves, and oftentimes we're using Recycle Energies here, so you'll normally be able to chain attacker relatively easily thanks to this Power Cyclone. 120, reasonable damage output. We also have Diancie Prism Star that you can see as a one-of course, that buffs this up to a base of 140. That means that we're able to knock out basically every dark and lightning tag team, even things like Choo Choo and Saboteur, they get in range now thanks to the Diancie. Actually, the dark stuff, they can still stay out of range with their resistance that they have, but we also play Shrine in here as well, and Spell Tag. So overall, the Diancie definitely helps push against these things, and in general, if we're not hitting for weakness, Diancie is going to help us 2-hit KO some of these tag teams. And again, we play Shrine as well, so this 120 is a decent vanilla output for sure. We then have a few one-offs in here. We have the Hoopa, obviously important thanks to its own psychic resistance. It's a big deal against things like Mewtwo and at the same time Malamar, one of the harder matchups I would say for this deck. I surprisingly don't think it's unwinnable, and it's for a really odd reason, and that reason is our damage output is so weird that it actually helps us. With the Diancie in play, we're still only doing 120 thanks to Giratina's resist, which means we're not knocking them out. And of course, we're psychic weak, so Giratina's will be knocking us out, which means we get to activate our spell tags and they don't. So if we use our spell tags to pop theirs, and like sort of set up like their Jirachis or their Malamars on the bench, it can be really good for us. And if they're attacking, if they're damaging themselves with their Giratina as well, that can also be like beneficial. We can punish them in different ways, like using the Hoopa, for example. So I think the Hoopa is a reasonable one-of. I obviously play Lana's Fishing Rod as well in here to try and reuse him and make the most out of him. But it is a very odd sort of spell tag war at times against Malamar, so do bear that in mind. We also play a Mew. Of course, this helps out against Pikarom, Reshiram, Mewtwo, and of course Malamar again, because this can be another way that we can pop spell tags without them sort of damaging us against a Mali, so do bear that in mind. We have one Tapu Koko Prism Star, which does seem a little out of place here, but the basic energy of our choice is Lightning, so that we can take advantage of Tapu Koko Prism, so we can make this 2 energy attack cost a little bit easier on ourselves. It means that if we miss attachment turn 1, we don't have to worry. We can still sometimes find our way towards this Tapu Koko Prism and reload that way, which is pretty reasonable. And then we have the one copy of Mimikyu. I think this is a huge selling point for the archetype. I think even with your type coverage, we've seen Malamar can still sometimes struggle against Mewtwo, just because they can still like use the Espeon Deoxys early enough to just like destroy your whole board. Basically, they just get rid of too many in-Ks that the Malamar player never even gets set up, and suddenly it's a rough time for them. Now we have a Mimikyu that we can find super early, and we're playing 3 copies of Shrine, as well as the Mew, as well as spell tags. We can try and at least shut down early Mewtwo pressure for sure. I think there'll be times where Mewtwo is going to be playing Stealthy Hood in the future, so this Mimikyu isn't just like straight up auto-win or whatever. But it definitely hurts and stems that early pressure. I think this archetype is very worried about a Mewtwo coming onto the board super early. Like if they go first, Welder attach, then Welder attach a Psychic and destroy a bunch of Ralts and whatever, we just fold. So having treasure accessibility to this one-of is super important, so that we can just find this alongside a Shrine, try and shut down that early Mewtwo pressure and make them find even more combo pieces, because I can't imagine they're going to be playing multiple Stealthy Hoods, at least not more than 2, I don't think, just because of how tight Mewtwo is in terms of how many tech attackers it has to play. So this Mimikyu definitely is a nice defense against Mewtwo in the early turns. Additionally, there's the Volcarona coming out from this set, which is also a big thing that we want to try and get around, because we have little 60 hit point Ralts that they could otherwise like capitalize on pretty easily. So this Mimikyu is a strong card for those reasons. It's also very decent against things like Dark Box, shutting down their abilities at times. So I do think this can be a bit of a threat for sure. Onto the trainers. I've already mentioned Lana's Fishing Rod. It allows you to shuffle a Pokemon and a Pokemon tool from your discard pile back into your deck. Now, I only played 2 copies of Spell Tag, and I think reusing those is great with a Fishing Rod for sure. It is a little bit cheeky to only play 2 spell tags, but we usually get access to more thanks to this card. And I think just being able to grab more Ralts, more Gallade pieces, more Hoopas in that matchup is always really important. Also things like extra Mews if people are going to try and target that, and if it's useful for whatever reason. We also play 2 copies of the new Great Catcher. Again, it's one of these cards where you kind of wish you could fit more, but at the very least Rosa can help scout this out, as well as Jirachi. Can try and find it for the right turns. I've already mentioned how important it is for this deck to be able to capitalize on the Dene, or even finish off things if we are trying to 2-shot GXs if we don't have good typing against them. So Great Catcher, obviously a big deal for that. I think another reason why Stage 2s have been, well, non-GX decks in general have been unable to succeed in the recent meta is because you basically can't fit custom catchers without really hurting consistency. And even if you are playing the custom catchers, it's hard to accumulate them at the right times. Now Great Catcher comes in to really fill that void and makes it very easy for us to pick off things and take advantage of Dedenne being used in every other deck, basically. We have 2 copies of Switch, as well as 2 copies of Skateboard to supplement the Jirachi engine, 3 copies of Pokemon Communication, as well as 4 Treasure for our sort of Pokemon search, and 4 Rare Candies. Even if we are using Rosa, it's not in a super high count, so we want to have access to Rare Candy naturally as much as possible. And then we're playing that 3 copies of Shrine of Punishment, just augmenting our damage in general, but at the same time has that combination with the Mimikyu to try and slow down these annoying ability Pokemon GXs that we don't want to deal with. We move on to the supporters. It's going to be 2 copies of the new Rosa. You can only play it when one of your Pokemon was knocked out, so I don't really want to play more copies of this card if you can help it. But like I said, it can really help you get your initial Glades going, or just making sure you have the next one powered up and ready to go, because it gets you a Pokemon, a trainer, and a basic energy, and then you put them straight into the hand, which is really awesome. And then we have 4 Cynthia and 4 Lillie, more sort of standard draw that you've seen in all sorts of decks. Very similar to Malamar, where you're going to try and find as many treasures as you can early game. Try and get a Jirachi into the active and all that good stuff, so that you can get not only your basics down in the first stages, but also work towards that stage 2 if we can help it. Onto the energy. Very odd energy line overall, and it's really one of the best things about Gallade is that it's all colourless. It lets you go down plenty of avenues, lets you abuse recycle energy, which is awesome. Essentially, your 2 energy attack cost, you move 1 non-recycle energy to the bench, and then you just always keep the recycle in the active, so that as soon as your Gallade gets knocked out, you know that straight away you can get that energy and pop it back on your next attacker, which is always fantastic for you. Also helps you retreat around if you want to. 3 copies of the new Draw Energy simply provides a colourless, but you get to draw a card, a little extra consistency boost compared to any other energy we could be playing, and 3 copies of that Lightning Energy so that we can abuse it with Tapu Koko, and of course Rosa is only able to access the basic energy cards, so we may as well play 3 copies for sure. So here is the full list. Pause now if you want to. It'll also be in the description below as always. We'll go into some tech options, and I really had to sit down for a while and have a think about all these options. When you're a colourless attacking deck, like completely, it really does open the door for all sorts of other things. I think Tapu Koko is a nice addition for sure, and you could even go further down that route if you want to add something like Zapdos for some more early pressure. I think if you do go down the Zapdos route, you probably want to play a 3rd copy of Switch and flip-flop it for your skateboard that you play. So you could go down the Zapdos route if you really wanted to. I'm not a huge fan though, just because if you're committing energy to Zapdos, it puts even more pressure on you finding that Tapu Koko a lot earlier. And at the moment, we're only playing 3 Pokecom, so you will have to shoehorn a few spaces around to make room for the Zapdos. But it does offer some nice early pressure that might be useful for sure, especially in non-GX matchups. Absol could be an additional help against Malamar to really try and slow them down if you can. And then there's the options for some different attacking options for sure. If you don't want to play Psychic Energies, there are a few different things you could play. There's the Copycat Mimikyu, which can definitely help out against Reshiram. Not necessarily that's a bad matchup, but I think you've already got Psychic typing covered, so you may as well play the Mimikyu that's a Fairy type instead. Or if you want to go all totally down the Psychic route, you could have the Psychic Mimikyu as well as Nihilego as well as Blacephalon. Mimikyu and Blound both have a 2 energy attack cost, of course, but when you're moving energy off your Gallade all the time, you can just let these sit on the bench and use them whenever you need to. I think the main reason why I'm not playing these is A, the Tapu Koko is a nice option, but B, you don't really want to commit too many spaces to physical Psych Energies, and if you're not committing spaces to the cards, you don't really want to use them too much. Possibly, you could increase your Rosa count to try and supplement the Blacephalon, the Nihilego a little bit better to give you some more burst options, and of course the Baby Blacephalon will definitely help out the Malamar matchup for sure, as well, for helping you make use of your spell tags and try and hurt their setup a little bit more than them just rinse and repeating Giratina turn by turn by turn, because of course we don't play customs, we have no way to disrupt them other than spell tag damage alone, as well as Mew, I guess. So the Blacephalon might come in to help that Malamar matchup as well, so I definitely think the Psychic Energies might be a reasonable route to go down, for sure, so definitely something you can explore. For the matchup overview, right now, I think I'm a little bit worried about Green's just with the amount of healing they have accessible to them if they are going to be a healing-based build. Guardian, I think, is less of an issue just because you have 160 hit points and they're hitting 150 almost the entire game. So even if they do have heals, you'll still be pretty reasonable against them, I think. Malamar, I think, is naturally pretty weak. Pidgeotto Control, I also think, is very awkward. Even with the Recycle Energies, they'll definitely have ways to get around you most of the time. Baby Blacephalon will usually try and outpace you, and you don't really play enough spell tags to make a difference in a prize race. Behemoth, of course, can hit us for weakness, which is very ugly. At the same time, we don't really have many answers to Lillie's Clefairy. That's the same reason why Floorspot is a hard matchup. And Breakzard, similar to Greenzard, I'm imagining is going to be making space for a bunch of healing options, pushing your 2 shots out of range a lot of the time. And also, of course, they have some great hand disruption options that they can use against you. And we're not playing any hand disruption at all, no Judge, no Reset Stamp. So we really just can't stop them tutoring the right cards in the matchup, and that's going to make life very difficult for us as well. On to the closing thoughts. I think, as you can see, that there are a lot of mainstream matchups which I think could be a headache for sure. So I think this is going to be one of these sort of more rogue decks for sure, just because you are having to dodge and weave a lot of mainstream matchups that I don't think are going anywhere. It really would take like Dark Box to become tier 1, Pikarom and Mewtwo to remain tier 1 without many people like answering it. And if Silvally Volk, kicks off and becomes a real contender as well, that becomes like a perfect storm for Gallade, where he comes in and becomes a great anti-meta option. But at the same time, I can't really see Malamar going anywhere, and there's still some good Charizard decks running around for sure. Like, Welder's not really a bad card, is it? So I imagine there's still going to be some issues for Gallade going forward for sure. I do sort of believe in Rosa, and I do really want to see her support some non-GX decks going forward, but at the same time, Stage 2s are still inherently so hindered by the fact that there are some other viable non-GXs out there, and Rosa helps all these other non-GX decks as much as it helps Gallade, so giving them a little bit of a push as well just means that you're going to lose prize races to other non-GX decks. So that's definitely something that I think will keep Gallade more in the rogue tier, but definitely an interesting build for sure. You get to play some very funky things altogether, but at the same time, you are just most of all trying to loop your Gallade the entire game and hope that your weakness is going to help carry you and help uptrade in certain spots. And that's just not always going to fly, especially because there are turns where you might whiff your rare candy or the next follow-up attacker or whatnot. So these are all things that I'm a little bit concerned about. So that's the main reason why I'm not super hyped on this archetype. I definitely think it's a fun one that's worth looking into, though. And like I said, if there are enough of the good matchups around, you definitely can be a successful build. So let me know what you guys think about Gallade down below. How have you built it? What tech Pokemon have you put into the list to help some of these more awkward matchups? I will hear it all down below. For now, though, it has been Joe from OmniPoke, and I will see you in another video tomorrow. Cheers.